a quarterly meeting that we hold. My name's Alison Blom-Cooper. I'm the Chief Planning Officer for Somerset Council. Today we've got a number of items on the agenda, but before I go through the agenda, just to say that the biodiversity net gain consultation on the draft guidance closed on Monday. Obviously, as I'm sure everybody's aware, we've now got the regulations and national guidance, and we are working through those to ensure the final guidance note is updated and amended as necessary, and then that will be going through our governance process for adoption, probably at either the January or the February meeting. I'm not quite sure how many comments we've received, and so that will depend the timing of the adoption of that guidance. Today we're therefore primarily going to give you an update on where we are with phosphates in part one, and for those of you who want a more general conversation, we're going to talk to you a bit about what we're doing around other validation guidance, not just the biodiversity net gain guidance, and also provide a few additional updates. So there's a wider team of officers here who will be taking through the various presentations. Rather than introduce them now, I will be leave them to introduce themselves as they start on items. Paul, I think you've just got some general housekeeping notes, haven't you?
I have indeed. Thank you very much, Alison, for handing over to me. Just want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded for those who cannot actually attend today's meeting, but also circulated wider. We do, if you recall, upload this onto the web. So if you do not want your image shown on the recording, please turn your cameras off. Secondly, as we don't have control over these invites because they are cascaded, we are aware that sometimes your email address will be disclosed. To those ends, we apologise for that, but we can't actually control that, but we're just drawing that to your attention at this moment in time. So without further ado, I'll turn off my camera and we'll go on to the presentation. My name's Paul Browning. I'm a principal planner, and the first part of our presentation is all around phosphates. Next slide, please, Lee. And the next one. This presentation will also be jointly undertaken with my colleague Emmeline. She'll come in part way through, and then she'll hand back to me at the end of the presentation, towards the end. In terms of the update, the purpose of the phosphate update is to actually advise you on where we are in terms of nutrient neutrality and supporting housing growth, including our P credit scheme for the River Tone. As just a reminder, broad headlines, we're talking about the 3 river catchment areas of the Brew, Parrett and River Tone. We will also give an update on the River Axe as well, bearing in mind that part of the River Axe catchment area falls within the Somerset locality. We will then go on to government announcements and updates in terms of the Council's Nutrient Mitigation Fund bid to central government. As you recall, we submitted that last May. Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. In terms of where we are with the Somerset calculator, I want to advise that we have signed off the technical updates to our Somerset budget calculator. They were signed off in October of this year. Unfortunately, as you're aware, this council has declared a financial emergency. To that end, there is more information on our website, and the link is there in the PowerPoint slide. Before the calculator is uploaded onto our website, our Excel space has to be converted into an app. That is based on advice that we've had from our colleagues in IT, bearing in mind that Excel, even though you can hide spreadsheets, worksheets, and also lock them down, there are packages on the web that unlock them. To those ends, the way forward, and also making sure that the calculator can be used on a variety of tools, was to convert it into an app. It is that purchase of that app and that requirement that has delayed the uploading of the calculator onto the website, because we need to approval from our central locality in terms of moving on. when the calculator is updated, just be aware that there will be supporting letters, also information regarding technology in terms of technical changes, and also a video as well. In terms of, next slide, please. In terms of updates across Somerset, just be aware that Jerston Farm appeal, which is a national test case, continues. As summarised here, it was dismissed at appeal in August 2022. The High Court dismissed the challenge by CJ Fry and Son on the operation of the Habitats Regs assessments in June 2023. Furthermore, the next stage of the appeal hearing of the High Court appeal is scheduled for March the 19th. It is 1.5 day hearing anticipated. Skeleton arguments, i.e. the statements of... Have I lost connection with you guys? Or am I still on the line?
No, we can still hear you, Paul.
Because the presentation, I've lost contact with all the presentation material.
Yeah,
no, I think
everyone has lost.
We have lost
someone else tried to share at the same time, so it took it away from me.
Right, can we hold on a second? Apologies for the inconvenience. Usually we have a slick operation, but today we're having to operate out of a number of offices, as you're probably aware. So we are now back to where we are. Thank you very much, Lee. In terms of where we are, the agreed estimate time is 1.5 days. Skeleton arguments, i.e. the statements from the King's Councils, have already been submitted. Next slide, please. Across Somerset, application guidance. We've done produced resources for the applicants, and these are published on our templates guidance link that's also on our website. So you've got the link there. Furthermore, just be aware that that is intended to be like a one-stop shop for all proposed developments that are affected by phosphates. So it's a useful guide for you to use. Furthermore, we've also published information regarding what we know are what we've termed third-party phosphate mitigation schemes on our website. We're aware that there are a lot of now third-party schemes. We're getting a lot of requests in our phosphate inbox. To those ends, we've published a list and contact details of known schemes where Natural England have signed off the scheme in terms of the anticipated mitigation in terms of phosphates being generated by the scheme, but also the number of credits likely to be anticipated. That should assist you, and we'll expand further in our presentation on this matter. Next slide, please, Lee. Turning to the catchment updates, I think this is where I hand over to Emmeline. Emmeline, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So I'm Emmeline Brooks, and I'm a phosphates planning officer at Somerset Council. So I'm just going to provide a bit of an update on each of the catchment areas that feed into the Somerset Levels and Moors in terms of where we're up to in each catchment area, and what mitigation schemes are operating in each of them, including an update on the Somerset Council scheme that's operating within the River Tone catchment area. So if you can just go to the next slide, please, Lee. So on the River Brue catchment area, we've got approximately 17 planning applications that are over 5 units awaiting phosphate solution, and that equates to circa 750 dwellings. As Paul's just mentioned, there are several third-party phosphate credit schemes in operation in the Brue catchment area, as listed on the slide, and they comprise a number of different solutions, so closure of agricultural operations and also temporary land fallowing, and they equate to a number of credits as listed on the slide. And if you move to the next slide, please, Lee. So yeah, in terms of what that looks like, so in terms of the Manor Farm third-party credit scheme, which was noted on the previous slide, there are approximately 30.4 credits that have been acquired or reserved from that scheme, and that equates to 273 dwellings that basically are able to demonstrate nutrient neutrality as a result of acquiring credits from that scheme. To note, those credits have been calculated on the basis of wastewater treatment work upgrades taking place post 2025. So under Wessex Water sort of asset management programme and the updates that are taking place as part of that. So essentially what that means is that those credits are able to go a bit further, given that there'll be phosphate efficiencies through those upgrades to wastewater treatment works. And what the council would do in those situations is basically apply a planning condition which would state that those dwellings cannot be occupied until those upgrades have taken place. So obviously as we get closer to that date, it becomes a bit more common that applicants are happy to use those post 2025 limits in terms of their phosphate reduction, but there would be a condition limiting occupation until those upgrades have taken place. There's also been a limited number of applications within the River catchment area that have been approved with their own, where applicants have progressed their own mitigation solutions, and primarily this is comprised of septic tank to PTP upgrades, package treatment plant PTP upgrades, so replacing an inefficient septic tank with a more phosphorus efficient package treatment plant, and then also woodland planting. Next slide, please, Lee. So moving on to the River Parrett catchment, within the River Parrett catchment, there are approximately 320 planning applications held in abeyance, equating to circa 4,500 dwellings. There has been significant progress in the River Parrett catchment in terms of being able to issue planning permissions, and that's reflected on this slide. So you can see there's been a range of planning applications for new housing either approved or with a resolution to approve subject to a section 106, using a variety of different mitigation measures. So some of which I've mentioned, including the package treatment plant upgrades. We've also seen planning applications where applicants have proposed to retrofit existing properties with water efficiency measures to generate phosphate mitigation, woodland planting as well, and also sorts of temporary land fallowing solutions. And there are a further 495 planning applications for 495 dwellings proceeding to committee in December in Area South, all of which have nutrient neutrality solutions. Next slide, please, Lee. So in terms of third-party credit schemes, again, we're working on third-party credit schemes within the River Parrett catchment with third-party mitigation providers. N-Trade, so a particular third-party scheme, is in operation in the River Parrett catchment. So we thought we'd give a little bit of an update in terms of where that's up to. So N-Trade has run its first market round, and that allocated P credits to planning applications equating to 80 dwellings and 2 care homes. N-Trade's also published the result of its second round within the River Parrett catchment area, and as part of that round they sold 10 kilograms of credits, an average cost of £45,000 per P credit. And it's anticipated that round 3 of the N-Trade market is going to commence in early 2024. Next slide, please, Lee. So next we move on to the River Tone catchment area. So within the River Tone catchment area, there are currently approximately 100 planning applications held in abeyance seeking a phosphate solution, which equates to circa 3,000 dwellings. As several of you on the call may already be aware, the Somerset Council is one of only a handful of councils across the country that has its own operational nutrient credit scheme, and that is operating in the River Tone catchment area. So we thought we'd provide a little bit of an overview of where we are with that P credit scheme in terms of what's happened to date, and then also how we're proposing to take this forward as well. So to date, we commenced round 1 of that nutrient credit, of our nutrient credit scheme in December 2022. We originally offered these P credits out to 53 planning applications, and that was based on a criteria-based prioritisation approach, which was previously agreed by the former Somerset West and Taunton Phosphates Planning Subcommittee. In total of the 53 planning applications that were offered to acquire Rivertone P credits, we received 29 applications, and this has resulted in 8.5p credits being allocated, which equates to around 41 dwellings. We commenced round 2 earlier this year. That offered P credits to around 22 planning applications, and we've received 6 applications that have been approved as part of round 2. So when we say approved, what that means is that applicants have submitted their phosphate budget calculations and their shadow habitats regulations assessment, and they've been reviewed by us, by the nutrient neutrality officer, who's confirmed that we can accept the information that's been received, and we as Somerset Council would look to adopt the shadow habitats regulations assessment as the habitats regulations assessment for that proposed development. And then on all of those, we're required to consult with Natural England, which I can come on to in a little bit more detail when we talk about round 3 of the scheme. So Lee, if you can go to the next slide, please. So moving on then to talk about round 3. So basically back on the 19th of October, a report was taken to Somerset Council Strategic Planning Committee, and that agreed in that meeting, we agreed the prioritisation process for round 3 of the Rivertone P credit scheme. So what we did was looked at the objectives of the scheme that was set back at the start of the process, and presented some options, as officers presented options to committee in terms of what the prioritisation process could look like going forward. What that resulted in is that for round 3, Rivertone P credits will still be prioritised towards housing development. So that's defined as C3 use classes and planning applications for traveller accommodation. We also have agreed that the remaining Rivertone P credits that are currently available, which equates to around 30 credits, will be split into 2 pots. So 10 of those of the approximately 30 credits that are still available will be ring-fenced and prioritised towards minor applications. And what that means in the context of housing development will be planning applications for under 10 dwellings. So any planning application for under that seeks to planning permission for under 10 dwellings. And that takes a kind of similar approach, I think, to what Natural England have been doing in the Tees Valley in terms of splitting available credits into different kind of pots of credits that are available. The Strategic Planning Committee also agreed that the requirement for implementable development is retained. So currently, under round 1 and round 2, we were operating on the basis that any development that seeks to acquire Rivertone P credits as phosphate mitigation must be able to commence development within 3 months of their planning permission being granted, unless otherwise agreed with the council, the local planning authority, and that's agreed as part of the Section 106 agreement. And all planning applications that are seeking to acquire P credits through the Rivertone scheme will be required to secure those P credits via a Section 106 agreement with the council, because there's that reciprocal arrangement between the council saying we will provide the mitigation and manage and maintain that, and then the applicant acquiring it, and that being a financial exchange. So if we move over to the next slide, please, Lee, we've set out essentially what we consider the process will look like for round 3. Obviously, it's slightly different in that it's going to apply to all planning applications for housing development. So there's a slightly less criteria as there was in the previous rounds, where we had the kind of long list of applications that were held in abeyance. And we've sort of recognised the need to move on from that now as the situation has progressed. So what we're suggesting will happen is that an application window will open for round 3, and within that application window, any applicant that would like to acquire Rivertone P credits as their phosphate mitigation would apply during that window. And as part of that, we would ask them to submit a short form and their phosphate budget calculations using the Somerset phosphate calculator to confirm their P credit requirements, so we can understand how many P credits might be required for that particular development. So obviously that will apply to anyone with a valid planning application registered with the council at that time for C3 housing development. Applicants will then essentially be placed on a round 3 list, so anyone that has expressed their interest in acquiring credits will then go on that list. We obviously want to make sure that applicants have kind of certainty around the fact that if they're progressing, they can work towards applying permission. So what we'll ask is, once those applications are on the list, once the case officer for that particular planning application confirms that that application is ready to proceed, and what that means is that essentially all other planning matters have been resolved and that planning application is only awaiting a phosphate mitigation solution before it can be granted permission. Then at that stage, what we'll do is issue a Rivertone P credit offer letter to the applicant to say, you know, your application is ready to proceed. This is the process. Would you confirm that you'd like to continue to proceed with acquiring Rivertone P credits? And the applicant would confirm that they do want to proceed or withdraw at that stage. And we would then ask them to submit a shadow habitats regulations assessment within a set time frame, and that essentially follows from here. It essentially reflects the process that's been in place for round 1 and round 2. So it's quite similar from this point onwards in terms of the applicant submits their shadow habitat regulations assessment. That will basically set out that with the acquisition of Rivertone P credits, they will be able to demonstrate that their proposed development would be nutrient neutral in perpetuity, in line with the requirements of the habitats regulations. Then, as happens now, is that the shadow habitat regulations assessment and the phosphate budget calculations will be checked by the nutrient neutrality officer. Once we're satisfied with that information, then the applicant will be issued with a Rivertone P credit approval letter. That will basically say, we've reviewed your information, we understand you require X number of Rivertone P credits to be acquired to ensure your development's nutrient neutral, and then outline the next steps. In terms of next steps and what that looks like, we do have a requirement to consult Natural England on all habitat regulations assessments. So at that point, we would consult Natural England for a 21-day period and say, you know, we've reviewed this shadow HRA, we would like this to be the adopted HRA for the proposed development. And then concurrently with that process, we'd submit a legal request to our legal colleagues to commence the Section 106 process. And again, we have the template Section 106 agreement for Rivertone P credits on the website, and that will follow the same approach. And then essentially, once the Section 106 is agreed and signed, then the planning permission can then be issued, because we've secured that mitigation. So that's a bit of an overview of what we think the process will look like. We're hoping to get it underway shortly in terms of the application window, and we will make sure that everyone's updated and update the website to reflect that as well, and in terms of how we're going to operate that and run it. So I think that's everything in terms of catchment area updates for the Somerset Levels and Moors catchment updates. So if you move to the next slide, Lee, I think I'm handing back to Paul now to cover the River Axe catchment area.
You are indeed. Thank you, Emmeline. Yes, River Axe catchment area. Small part of it falls within Somerset, especially around the areas of Tatworth, Chard, and also on the Blackdown Hills. Those are in now area south and area west of Somerset. Please be aware that on the River Axe catchment, Somerset Council is not the lead authority, East Devon are. To those ends, we are aware of the opportunities of releasing credits, P credits, by the way of septic tanks and upgrades to small developments linked to woodland planting, has supported the release of generally some small scale development in the river catchment area within Somerset. To those ends, just be aware that we are aware of a recent appeal decision. 2 schemes in Tatworth, that's in area south, totaling 48 dwellings, were refused at appeal because of the risk of effect of phosphates on the protected river acts. To those ends, within the appeal decision, the appellant had suggested off-site mitigation such as creating wetlands could lessen the development's impact, but this was not included or submitted in any unilateral undertakings, and therefore the inspector concluded there was uncertainty on delivery. Therefore, the application was refused on this and other grounds. Next slide, please, Lee. So finally, across all the catchment areas within Somerset, i.e. the Brew, the Tone and the Parrett, planning applications are progressing across the river catchments, where applicants are also progressing their own mitigation solutions. Also, officers are continuing to liaise with third-party providers with providing with further P credit solutions within the catchment areas. The next slide, please, Lee. To those ends, we have now, as previously advised, we've listed the third-party schemes on our website. All third-party schemes, bear in mind that the local planning authority has no control over either the prioritisation of these P credits to applicants or the pricing. That is subject to third parties beyond our control. Please be aware that where we've got a P mitigation provider with an overarching section 106 with a local planning authority, should an applicant, a third party, want to use these, what we will do is secure the P credits by a way of a condition. Effectively, you prove that you have purchased or have reserved P credits from this third party provider. The information we've got on our website gives you links to these third-party providers, and we will update it as and when we have received further information that the applicant has secured natural England support for the overall scale of mitigation proposed or anticipated and the number of P credits being generated. Hopefully that will then simplify the situation of not having a further section 106 with each individual applicant. In other words, we're just actually tying this to a condition, i.e. proof of purchase of the P credit from a registered known provider. Next slide, please. That's our updates in terms of the catchment areas. If we move to the next slide, please, we're going to government announcements. As most of you are probably aware, the Levelling Up and Generation Bill is now an act. It was enacted on the 26th of October of this year. Water companies now have a statutory duty to upgrade their wastewater treatment works to a technical achievable limits, often referred to as TAL, for nutrient removal in designated areas such as the Somerset, Levels and Moors, Bramsar sites by 2030. Remember also that lots of the provisions within the Act require further detailed regulations. Our understanding is these have to become enacted within 3 months, often of the bill becoming an act, hence the date of the 26th of January. Once in force, it is our understanding is that the 2030 upgrades, these 12 new technical achievable limits, will be treated as certain for purposes of Habitat's regs assessments. Further work is also needed, and we also need information regarding catchment area and permitting from the Secretary of State. As yet, we haven't yet received it. Next slide, please. Moving on, government updates in terms of our nutrient mitigation fund. Just to remind everybody, in the end of May this year, Somerset Council submitted a partnership bid for funding from the government's nutrient mitigation fund. The funding proposal seeked capital of 9.63 million, but also ongoing revenue of 0.9 million to deliver in perpetuity phosphate mitigation proposals that will affect housing developments. In aim, our bid was to actually increase the supply of P credits across all of our 3 river affected catchment areas of the Brew, Parrett and Tone. Next. Please be aware that it did not include the River Acts. Next slide, please. In terms of where we are, within the autumn statement, the government indicated that it would be proposing £110 million to fund support to local planning authorities to deliver high quality schemes to offset nutrient pollution and are not planning permissions that are currently being stored in the planning system. Unfortunately, we have no details on who or how it is going to be administered. Furthermore, we are still waiting government announcements about funding decisions and whether our bid was successful. That applies to other local authorities that submitted bids, such as our partners in Dorset. Moving on. Next slide, please. That comes to the end of our short presentation. I think we're now open to questions and answers session. So I will put my camera back on. I can see there have been a number of questions in the chat. Are there any things that we want to pick up, Emmeline?
Oh, sorry, Paul, I was just trying to unmute my mic. I think a lot of the questions have actually been answered by colleagues in the chat. So I don't know if there's anything else that anyone wanted to expand on or have answered, then yeah, please pop your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can answer them.
I'm just screening down on invites and seeing whether or not anybody's got their hand raised.
No, no one has at the moment, Paul. So
No, I can see that as well. The screen down. No questions. If there are no questions, rather than normally take a break, do we want to move on to the next item? Next slide, please, then, if there are no questions. Can I hand over to, I believe it's going to be Helen Vittery on the first part of this validation bit, because if we're going to move on to the next slide, it's minerals and waste.
Thanks, Paul. Next slide then, please. For those of you that don't know me, I am Helen Vittery. I'm the planning manager for minerals and waste in what was the county council, attending today just for your information. The validation checklist on our website is slightly dated. We did a refresh in 2020 that went out to consultation, but for a number of reasons was not formally adopted. So this is just a really quick note to let you know that it's being updated again. It's ready to go out to consultation and it will be going out very shortly with the other checklists that you're about to hear about. The main changes being reference to BNG and to phosphates. Otherwise, there's nothing significant in there that's different to what you've already seen. And if you've got any issues, comments, questions, you are very welcome to get in touch with me where they relate to minerals and waste matters. And that's all there is really from me, unless anyone has any specific questions, but I suspect we'll mop those up at the end of this session. So, Paul, I'm handing over, but I'm not sure who's doing the next slide.
Next slide, please.
Paul, do you want me to take this?
If you could, please, Alison.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. We in Area West, the validation list is currently just over 2 years old, and so we are taking the opportunity also to update the list that's applying there, and to sort out a number of anomalies. One of which is the change to the householder red line to show the boundary of the site. Which I think is relatively straightforward, but we will also be picking up the policy that was adopted by the previous Somerset West and Taunton Council earlier this year around the need for local labour agreements. So that advice will be going into the checklist, together with, as Helen has just described, the checklist for phosphates and biodiversity net gain, which has already been out to consultation but will be consolidated in there. And we will also be putting into the checklist the health impact assessment requirement for the former West Somerset area, which is set out in the West Somerset local plan as a requirement for the major applications. So that will be going out for consultation along with the minerals and waste, and also across the council more widely we will be sharing the phosphates validation requirements. Thank you. Don't know if there's anything on the next slide. Emmeline, I don't know whether you want to take specifically the phosphates.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alison. So yeah, as Alison Hen just mentioned, in terms of updating the validation list with phosphates requirements, and we thought we'd just outline as part of this presentation what that includes, as phosphates has sort of been the kind of key agenda item. So the validation list will be updated, and essentially what that will do is include a validation requirement for the submission of the nutrient neutrality assessment and mitigation strategy, phosphate budget calculations using the Somerset phosphate budget calculator, and also recommending the submission of a shadow habitats regulations assessment, as we talked about in kind of under item 1, and then again just signposting on this slide when we share the slides after the meeting to some useful guidance that can help in the preparation of those documents as well, that's available on our website. I think that's it for that item. Lee, do you want to pop to the next slide? Great, thank you.
Finally, item 3, are there any additional updates, Alison? I know you've introduced yourself and said you're now the head planning officer or chief planning officer. Well done.
Thank you. I'm not sure that there are any specific updates at the moment, other than what we've just described around the validation guidance. People will be aware that there is now a new planning and transport policy exec subcommittee. The first meeting is on the 19th, so the guidance on biodiversity net gain will be going through that process in due course, as will guidance around SIL section 106 and so on. That new committee will be responsible for those executive policy, planning policy and transport policy functions. I haven't got anything else. I'm happy to answer any questions insofar as I can.
I can see John has been answering questions in the chat. Are there any people who want to raise questions verbally to Alison or myself or anybody else on the call? So please raise your hands. I can't see anybody raising their hands. Oh, I see one hand. Kevin.
Thank you. I understand the scheme of delegation is being revisited. I'm talking about principally Area East. I don't know about the rest of the district or rest of the county. Currently, all departures are being heard by the planning committee, even those that have no objections and are recommended for approval, but they all become discussion items, which is bunging up the agenda. I know it's difficult then to get applications to committee. Also, up to 6 objectives are now get 3 minutes to speak on other applications. Again, really banging up the agenda and taking time. Is this being revisited? It was something that Julie mentioned when she was here, but I've heard nothing further recently. Thank you.
I can pick that up, Paul. Yes, it is being revisited. We are, as you rightly said, doing a review of the constitutional arrangements across the whole of the authority, and there will be the same delegation scheme in place across the whole of the authority. We are reviewing how it's been operating with members, and it's due to go through governance and the formal processes early in the new year.
Thank you.
Rebecca Randall, have you got a question?
Yeah, it's more of an observation really. Just in discussing, well, so a couple of people put on the chat that it'd be good to have a family tree or general list of planning officers, because they sort of continue changing, so that's probably a good idea. Just from my perspective, I've had a few chats with different planning officers across all sort of 4 areas, so they were all 1 now, and I know that some officers have anywhere between sort of 50 and in some cases 90 applications on their desk, and that's no one's fault. And I said to them, you know, it'd be really helpful if at some stage we could get back to the agents forums that we used to have. I think a hybrid is a good solution so that people can come online and maybe meet face to face as well, but just have a conversation about how, as planning agents, we could help take the pressure off of some of the officers, informal things we talked about, things like officers are really struggling with instruction forms to legal. They're like, oh, it takes ages and I've got all this other stuff to do. And I was like, well, I mean, could I not do some of that? I don't know. Is there anything we can do in terms of our planning statements to make them easier as more of a checklist so they can go, right, it's in a standard format, so we know that information is there. I think it's a really good idea to update the validation checklist. But yeah, can we have a conversation at some stage, either in this forum or another one, about how planning agents and officers can work better to streamline the system and ultimately take the pressure off of the planning officers at some stage?
Rebecca, thank you very much. That's a very welcome suggestion, and we will certainly take you up on that offer, but I suggest we have a small group of people to discuss that rather than a big forum such as this.
Yeah, sure. Sounds great.
I can't see any other people putting their hands up. So, Alison, do you want to bring the agenda to a close in the meeting and say any last words, or do you want me to do it?
I think the only thing to say is to thank everybody for attending today, and we'll certainly take on board the suggestions about meeting with a smaller group to talk about how we can help each other to have an effective system. I'm not sure. I've seen somebody suggesting that we have face-to-face meetings for area offices again, as before COVID. I think given the staff resources that we've just discussed, it's unlikely that we will be doing that. And in any event, we want to try and operate in a consistent basis across the whole of the authority. So my intention would be to continue to hold these on a Somerset-wide basis, but we will certainly look to potential for holding them in a hybrid fashion. Right, so thank you, and we will set another date probably in 3 months' time.
Okay, I think that wraps it up then, Alison. So thank you very much, everybody. I trust you found this a useful event. We look forward to seeing you in 3 months' time. All the best then. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, bye.